Remember when I said that we lived in a matrix, that we were souls having a human experience, and in this experience, we have to learn how to break free from this matrix. Now, I'm not talking about Matrix with Keanu Reeves. It's not quite as dark as that, but it's still a matrix in its own right. Today, we are going to be pulling back the veil on part of the corrupt power structure that has us stuck in this endless loop, this endless cycle that we must become awake to in order to change our habits to break free from it. And within this matrix, there are three mega corporations that we're going to be talking about that are involved in our lives in so many ways that I don't think you realize, and I sure didn't realize until I started looking into things and doing my research and verifying information. It's a bit shocking and it's concerning as well. Before we dig into everything, I first want to create a foundation. Um, I want to talk about names and specific words and phrases that are going to be very important in understanding this particular language that we're going to be navigating today. Many of the examples I'll be using today can be found on Ian Carroll's channel, the Blackrock conspiracy video. I actually will be referencing quite a few moments from his video today and interjecting a few of his own clips into this video today, as well as one of his TikToks that I think does a fabulous job in explaining how these mega corporations' tentacles are involved in everyday aspect of all of our lives. One of the main characters that I'll be going over today is Larry Fink. Now, Larry Fink is a billionaire here in the United States. He was born November 2nd of 1952. He is the co-founder and chairman, as well as the CEO of Blackrock. And just so you know, BlackRock manages approximately $13.46 trillion in assets. And his net worth as a billionaire is 1.2 billion.
There are plenty of aisles in your grocery store where every single option is owned by the same singular mega corporate mass of just banker money. And a bunch of these shampoos and conditioners are in class action lawsuits for causing hair loss, and one even faced accusations for making people's hair catch on fire. That's a true story. You can look it up. Those very same companies, though, they market hair regrowth products right there in the same aisle from the same company. Problem, solution. We are, of course, talking about the Blackrock conspiracy.
We were given the illusion of choice when, in reality, everything is actually owned by the same three mega corporations that run the global financial market. Some good examples that I can briefly touch on are Stay Free, the feminine hygiene. They're actually owned by Duracell, the battery company, as well as Hidden Valley Ranch. It's owned by Clorox. I'm going to go ahead and show a TikTok where Ian's going to go in further depth about this feminine hygiene, and not only that, a few other different items as well.
So after filming that last video, I got an idea and wound up in the feminine hygiene aisle. You know, as a dude does on a Sunday afternoon. And I was looking at that shelf and thinking, I wonder how many of those products are sending money to BlackRock and State Street. And how many are anyone else? Well, you know how we do, so I got out my crayons and I started coloring. And look what I found out. Red is Kimberly Clark. Orange is Procter & Gamble. Yellow is Edgewell. Pink is actually Energizer, like the battery company. Yeah, it turns out that Energizer bought Stay Free pads from Johnson & Johnson in 2013. That's weird. Oh yeah, and then let's not forget, this little blue corner up here is this other brand that I had to look up. Organic from Corman SPA, located in Milan, Italy. Super hard to find information about this company. Some sources say that they're a public company, but everything I can tell just says that they are second generation family owned. I don't know. But they do seem like they're organic, or they're organicer than the other options. And goddamn Winco did not have Cora pads. I quit. So, if you watched the last video, then you'd know that we already looked up who owns all of these companies. Biggest shareholders by a lot, biggest shareholders by a hell of a lot, and biggest shareholders by a lot. Oh yeah, but now we gotta look up Energizer. And biggest shareholders by a good bit. So when all these companies were making all these tampons and pads and such, who were the biggest stakeholders that they were all beholden to? Was it women? Was it women that they were beholden to? No, it turns out that all of these companies were all beholden to Blackrock and Vanguard when they made those products. And those ones right there, those were some homies over in Italy. I don't know. But that's choice in the American supermarket for you right there, ladies. You should probably buy Cora. Doing this kind of got me thinking we should do this for other products too.
There are actually many class action lawsuits that are going on, but one of the ones that actually caught my attention that was the most shocking and sickening was the one on the baby food. And this actually reached the House Oversight Committee, and it had to deal with toxic heavy metals in baby foods. And just so that way you get a rough estimate and a number, arsenic, it was 91 times, that's 9,100%. Lead, 177 times, that's 17,700%. Cadmium, 69%, that's 6,900%, as well as mercury, 5 times, so that'd be 500% of the daily value. And now I understand why there was such a push for moms to blend and make their own baby food at home, because as I'll explain later in the video, not only is this legally allowed, these mega corporations are actually supposed to do this.
And baby formula was even worse. Some of these baby foods were testing at 177 times the acceptable level of lead in baby food. Not 177%, 177 times. That is 17,700% the legal limit of lead in baby food. This is in the baby food, folks. It's babies.
When doing your own research and deciding to look into this, I wanted to let you know a very key phrase that's going to be super important in looking up this, because you can't just go and Google who owns this, who owns that, because you're going to be getting a very tricky, kind of gray response that's meant to kind of send you in circles. And the key phrase that I'm going to want you to look for is institutional ownership. Now, an example that I'm going to go ahead and use, and Ian will also actually cover in a clip that I'm going to show later in this video, we'll go ahead and give Clorox as the example. Some of the top institutional owners of Clorox, and this is as of May of 2024, would be Vanguard at 12.3%, which would be 15.28 million. Blackrock at 8.48%, that would be 10.53 million, as well as State Street would be 6.55%, so $8.13 million is how much they own as institutional ownership within the company. And this is actually pretty typical, and you'll see this across many of the name brands where they don't own quite everything, but there's a way that makes it so they actually have quite a bit more control. And just trust me, this video is going to seem dark, but I promise there is a silver lining to everything. A brief overview of some of the different, I don't know, categories. I'm not sure what the best word is. Different industries that these mega corporations have their strings attached to. Typically, food and beverage is what we're going to be covering today. Banks, automotive, big tech, green energy, oil and gas, construction, hospice, funerals, cemetery, as well as the military complex. You know, just to kind of touch on the baby food thing again, if they're going to poison us on the way in, I mean, I guess they might as well make money on us on the way out.
I didn't stop there. I looked up everything from detergent to cereal. I did sauces, ice cream, dressings. In the end, you start to realize what many of us all already kind of know, but have never quite visualized. All of our abundance, all of our foods and drinks and soaps and lotions, everything else. Thousands and thousands of brands to choose from, but it's actually all owned by just a handful of mega corporations. The more of this research you do, the more you realize that these sheets always seem to look the same. Dave's Killer Bread, not owned by Dave. Sorry, it was bought by Flowers Foods, a mega corporation, and they're owned by Vanguard, Blackrock, and State Street, plus a bunch of banks and fund managers. General Mills, JP Morgan, Norfolk Southern, American Waterworks, top owners, Vanguard, Blackrock, and State Street, highlighted in red, plus all the banks and financial institutions and investment firms making up the rest of the lists. You start looking at entire industries and you realize that the same is true for all of the biggest corporations in every industry, like food and beverage, banking, big tech. The same is true for the oil industry and for the green energy industry, even literally for hospice, funeral care, and cemetery homes. Because if you're going to make money poisoning people right out the gate in the baby food, I mean, why not also make money when they die, right? So, as I did all this research across basically every industry in the economy, I found the same major thing over and over and over again. It's a big club, and we are not in it.
How much of the stocks do these three mega corporations actually own? We can kind of break it down, and as Ian said, if we go and take a look at the top 100 companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street combined own over $5 trillion invested. Now, of the top 100, that is 42.21%. And then of the top 25, that's 83.42% is what they own of stocks. And that number just, it blows my mind. I've read this so many times. I've been looking into this for over a year now, and still when I hear the numbers, it shocks me.
Naturally, I got curious just how much of the stock market of all the publicly traded companies do BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street actually own. Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street combined represent more than $5 trillion invested in the top 100 companies. Collectively, that represents 42.2% of all the shares of ownership in the top 100 companies. If you expand your scope to the 25 biggest financial institutions, they collectively own 83% of the shares. 83%. This is just the top 25 biggest financial institutions. There are hundreds of them. The more shares you own, the more votes you get. So if you own 10% of the shares, you get 10% of the voting rights. Most of the money that the big three manage is not their own money. Most of it is actually our retirement accounts, like trillions of dollars of our retirement accounts. Look this up for yourself. It's not hard to figure out. When you buy a share of a mutual fund or an index fund or an exchange traded fund, all the types of products that the big three are selling, you sign over your voting rights to the fund managers, to BlackRock. Sure, they are managing your money, but they are also managing your voting power. And so, when we say that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street own 42% of all the shares in the top 100 companies on the market, that means that they control 42% of the voting power. Add in their buddies, and the top 25 financial institutions control 83% of the voting power. That means they control all of these companies. They pick the boards of directors. They pick the policies. They decide how things are going to run. When
A share of ownership, as well as a share of the voting rights. These companies, ironically and in a sick way, run democratically, but in reality, you have to pay for your vote. Now, just as an example, if a company owns 10% of the shares, it owns 10% of the votes. And the shareholders vote on who will be on the board of directors. And the board of directors is who hires the C suite. Now, who is the C suite? The C suite is the CEO, the COO, the CFO, all those different operating chiefs is who the board of directors hires and fires, but the shareholders is who votes in the board of directors. Mutual fund investors generally delegate their voting rights to the fund managers. Index fund managers, who are usually asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, are legally entitled to vote for the shares in index funds. Basically, we own a share of the funds, not a share of the company, so they vote for us.
we are not the investors that they are beholden to anymore. Now, all of these companies' fiduciary duty is to the bankers and the fund managers and the Larry Finks of this world. They are legally bound to do what is best for them, not for you. And if it's best for them to sell baby food with 177 times the legal amount of lead in it, well, they're going to do it. If it's best for them to sell you untested pharmaceutical products, then they're going to do it. If they'll make more money filling the food with drugs and poisons, not only are they going to do it, they are legally obligated to. It's their fiduciary duty, and they can actually be fired if they don't.
Fiduciary duty is such a disgusting word, and the more I hear it, the more it makes my skin crawl. And Anne does so much of a better job explaining what it is, but just as a summary, fiduciary duty is the underlying responsibility of the directors and officers of the corporation to act in the best interests of its shareholders. And like we were talking about earlier, the amount of shares you own the amount of votes you get. So those who own the most shares is in the interest that the company has to act for, if that makes sense. How it's supposed to work is where the community invests in the company and the company does what's best for the community. That's how it's actually supposed to work. But they do what's best for the bankers, and they're legally bound to do it. If it's the shareholders' best interest to sell you poisoned foods, they're legally bound to do so. And that's the loophole that keeps these corrupt billionaires and corrupt board members, all these people in power and free of any accountability or any responsibility. And that's, why we're dealing with chronic illnesses, why we have so many issues in big pharma. I could go off on a whole separate video about big pharma and all the problems it's caused, as well as how I also believe that the opioid epidemic here in America was related and was caused by our government. Another little side note about Larry Fink is he also invented an AI. It's kind of like an asset liability AI where it tracks stocks and it basically monitors the market for him. And its name is Aladdin. Now, if you break that down, it stands for Asset Liability and Debt Derivative Investment Network. He started it in 1988. It's a supercomputer to help monitor the markets. It really honestly doesn't have a whole lot of oversight. And Aladdin helps oversee over $11 trillion in assets for Blackrock. Just to give you an idea of how big Aladdin is to the financial market, I'm going to go ahead and show the 2020 Business Insider Vanguard State Street Global Advisors, the largest fund managers after BlackRock, are users, as are half the 10 insurers by assets, as well as Japan's 1.5 trillion government pension fund, the world's largest. Apple, Microsoft, and Google's parent firm Alphabet, the three biggest US public companies, all rely on the system to steward hundreds of billions of dollars in their corporate treasury investment portfolios. 1/3 of its 240 clients hold an accumulation of $21.6 trillion. The GDP of the United States is 27 trillion. If 1/3 of Aladdin's clients equate to 21.6 trillion, it's probably overseeing on like globally 50 to 60 trillion dollars. BlackRock is also into the government bailout business. It got involved with the government two different times in our recent history. Once in 2008, when the government actually asked for help with the bailouts. I'll go ahead and show an article here from the New York Times. And that wasn't the only time. We went back in 2020 for the coronavirus. And here we are repeating the same sad mistake. Just as a quick summary, BlackRock is one of the largest money managers in the world. They invest other people's money into funds we buy into, hold the stocks for everyone because of how much of the shares they own. They also hold all of the voting power. However, they wind up owning so much of the market. They also own a share of the voting power for all of the companies. They vote on all of the shares that they manage, and all of the Americans shared and saved wealth. That's why everything is so controlled, is because even though they don't necessarily own a whole company outright, they own little bits of every single company, and they also own little bits of each other, making it, you know, almost impossible to track, and they're able to bail each other out. And if I remember right, I think um, Blackrock owns Vanguard now, if memory serves correct.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
Larry Fink has been pushing ideas like DEI, impact, as well as ESG. Um, just like in the video showed, he's trying to force behaviors. And if they're able to force behaviors like that, who's to say what other behaviors they'll be able to force in the future? Remember how I mentioned board members earlier? Well, I'd like to take a look at some board members, specifically at BlackRock and Pfizer. There's also going to be a couple of their sub companies we're going to go into, but those are going to be the main ones we're going to be covering. On the BlackRock board of directors, we'll be looking specifically at Larry Fink, um, the star character of this, um, as well as an important one to mention would be Fabio Frida, as well as, let's see, Marcos Antonio Slim. Um, some other really important ones to mention would also be Adebayo Unglesi. He's a Nigerian lawyer, an investment banker, and he's actually tied into the scandal with GameStop. Um, but when it comes to Fabio Frida, his scandal, if I remember correctly, ties specifically into Ronald Lauer, who is a part of the Estee Lauder company, who have heavy ties to the Rothschilds family. And of course, Ronald Lauder had ties to Epstein as well. Now, the board members, many of them hold multiple board seats at multiple companies. The more I looked at some of Ian's graphs, the more I realized he really was right. It really is just this sick game of who can climb to the top of the ladder, being the most dishonest, the most vile human, who really is being truly, 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 truly selfish. The next board of directors I'd like to focus in on would be Pfizer. Um, the main one we'll be looking in on is Susan Desmond Helmond. Now, she's an MD. Now, she's a board member to Pfizer, but she's also a CEO to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, you would think that's someone of this status would only be a part of boards of importance. Well, Ian actually zeroed in on one of the other boards that she sat on, was the National Resilience Incorporated. When he dug further into it, the board of directors for the National Resilience Incorporated, the people mentioned are Robert Nelson, Drew Oding, Francis Arnold, who I believe had a PhD, Mitchell Daniels Jr., Susan Desmond Hellman, okay, of course. Kay Foster, Denise Torres, Patrick Yang, PhD, Rule Singavi, George Barrett, Chris Darby, as well as Scott Gottlieb. Now, the reason why I stopped on a couple of those names, Chris Darby, he's actually the CEO to a CIA investment firm called Incutel. And Scott Gottlieb has ties to the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and Drew Otting has ties to Palantir. And what the board of directors for the National Resilience Incorporated, they were actually responsible for helping manufacture the mRNA material for the COVID vaccine for Pfizer. Another lawsuit that's widely known is the one with Johnson & Johnson with asbestos in the baby powder. One of the board of directors, Mary Beckerly, PhD, she was also on the American Cancer Society, as well as the National Cancer Institute, the HHMI, the NIH, as well as the DFHCC. Now, Johnson & Johnson knew for decades that it had asbestos in the baby powder, and it was actively covering up. So somebody who's a doctor and a PhD, why are they helping cover this up? Wouldn't they know the implications? And especially somebody who worked for a cancer institute, wouldn't they understand the implications of constant exposure to asbestos? Well, it did end up in a $700 million settlement. But that didn't stop them from giving what was it? I believe, CEO Grosky, he got nearly a $300 million payment plan. Stock buybacks are also going to be something really important that I want to touch on briefly. I'm going to be showing a picture here of a graph. And basically, it's to show when large companies prepare for instances like 2008 as well as COVID. I'm going to see if I can find a clip as well of Ian mentioning specifically this particular thing, but I don't know if I can find a clip. I think I can only get the picture. But basically, these mega corporations knew often before these big financial, I don't know if catastrophes is the right word that I want to use, and they prepared for it. And these graphs prove it. These graphs also show the struggle that millennials and Gen Z have had becoming adults in this current economic and financial world that just constantly seems to be punishing us. And no matter how hard we try, how hard we work, we never quite seem to get a leg up in the world. The reason I wanted to talk about this particular topic today was because these are the people that we need to know about, but they don't want us to know about them. And actually, a few of them that are friends with these board members that own media companies help keep us distracted, help keep us divided. And a lot of the stuff and everything going on in the world is also a tactic and a ploy to keep us divided because so many of us are waking up. They are doing everything they can to slow it down. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I know a lot of this seems incredibly bleak and incredibly dark, but it seems that way because the darkness that's always existed is finally having light shed on it. And not only that, we're actually winning. That's why they're throwing a fit. That's why they're throwing a tantrum. That's why I've mentioned in a previous video that this is the death rattle. This is the lower vibrations throwing everything they can at us to try to slow us down. But too many of us are waking up too fast, and too many of us are starting to see through this veil and really see the power structures and the manipulation and all the ways we've actually been lied to. And not only that, we're remembering that we're in control and we have a lot more power than we think. And we're sovereign souls. We're sovereign beings. And we choose how this reality goes. And like I've mentioned before, thank you for coming with me behind the curtain and beyond the veil. Just know you're not crazy, you're just early.